Now we're going to move on to our clinical lecture with Dr. Roger Pham, a general practitioner from Bakersfield, California. He graduated from the USC School of Dentistry, and then he completed an AEGD at UCSF. That is a lot of initials in one sentence. And his AEGD had a focus on aesthetics and full mouth rehab. He's really just one of the sharpest young doctors you're going to meet. His practice leverages the latest technologies, including cone beam, digital impressions, 3D facial scanning, digital photography, laser dentistry, 3D printing. So he's really on top of it. I think you're really going to enjoy his lecture today on aesthetics, SmileCraft, from planning to execution. And he's going to talk about a protocol that he's developed for providing his patients with great aesthetic results. So Roger, it's great to have you here, and take it away. It's all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Park. I really appreciate it. Thank you for a panel. Great advices. Again, that's also coming from a private practice too. I think that what Angela was saying actually makes a lot of sense, and I think that's actually great that she emphasizes that today. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and basically get going with our presentation here. Awesome. So the topic of discussions today is going to be aesthetics. And SmileCraft is actually a term that I kind of created. Basically, I like the way it sounds. It's basically an art. So us as dentists are basically artists, just like a poet, an architect, a painter. They create art in themselves, and we create teeth as the art. So we as providers, as clinicians, we're able to see harmony in teeth where there isn't. We're able to transform a disorganized smile into something pleasing, into something that can, number one, change someone's life and also enhance natural beauty as well. And so today's presentation is going to talk about how you can take something like this and turn it into something like this, or even that, and go to something like this. And so all of it is possible. We all have the skills necessary to do it. We just need to plan it out. And that's kind of the way I've always kind of taken my life is I like to plan things. And a quote by Benjamin Franklin, our old president, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. So it's short and simple. Basically, if you don't know where you're going, you're lost. You're never going to get there. So when it comes to dentistry, it's complicated enough as is. And therefore, just to really, really dial it in and make it easier for yourself, prepare, start with the end in mind, and basically work your way back. So just basically like an artist seeing its final canvas. So he doesn't just go and start painting. Some of them do, and if they're really good, but a lot of them, when they start, they basically have to kind of start by mapping things out and really kind of entering into a skeleton before getting the final work completed. Or like a photographer, for example, who's basically framing his shots, looking through the lens, kind of looking at the lighting and things like that, and really seeing what he wants before he takes that final shot. For us, it's the same thing. We have to see the final outcome and really, really dial in what we want before you can dial it in for the patients. So basically, you asked me, where do I start? Well, I just have one simple answer, and it's always with the end in mind. And really, how to prepare for a predictable outcome. Well, I came up with a series of 8 simple steps. The best way to do it is to really just keep it simple, okay? So 8 steps. The first one, again, we just talked about it. Visualize the end result. Start with the end in mind. Okay, so once you have that going, then you basically go into collecting your data. So things that your office would normally do, come up with a treatment plan, make it as ideal as possible. You evaluate the position of the teeth. So that's also kind of part of the treatment plan too, but it has its own little separate step because depending on where the patient is, we may not be able to do it. Step 5, create a wax up. You need those reference line, that skeleton that we talked about earlier, you need that created in order to know where you're going. And so once you have it on, you can then try it in on to the patient. I call it a test drive. The patient basically gets it on, gets to enjoy it, see what it looks like. You let them plan it, tell you whether or not they're happy with it, and then you go from there. From there, you prepare the teeth and you finalize. So these 8 steps, I know it sounds like a lot, but once you kind of dive through it, it really just kind of sequentially go basically in order of how dentistry should kind of take naturally place. So we'll kind of get into it, and then we'll kind of talk about a case that I've done, and I'll just kind of walk you through all the steps that I've taken basically. So this is Edgar. Edgar is a patient of mine. He's 36 years old, no significant medical history, no dental allergies. He came in my practice because one of his friends actually comes here too. He has no insurance. He's cash pay. And basically his chief complaint was, I chipped my front teeth. So this was what he came up with. So as you can see here, there's some incisor wear, but nothing really significant. He just said, that's what bothers me. So we're going to kind of start the step. So step 1, visualize the end result. So easily I could have just said, oh, that's easy. You can just put some bond on it and then we'll just call it a day. But what you kind of want to do is really let the patient drive the conversation. So by visualizing the end result, you see what you can achieve for them, and then you kind of let them basically guide you to where they want to go. So ask your patient, what do you not like? He'll tell you. So as I asked him, he then started to kind of talk a little bit more about things, right? So then on top of that, then you look at him and then you see what you don't like. Use his information. You then start to kind of narrow the direction that he wants to go. You as the clinician then know what's wrong, the etiologies, what's causing these issues, things like that. So basically looking at him, right? So he's married, 2 kids. He came in with his wife, beautiful family, super nice. He's in the restaurant business. So he started telling me about his life, customer facing all day. Never really liked his smile. He's always really trying to hide or downplay his smile. So I actually had to work really hard there to actually have him smile that big. He's always been very self-conscious about his teeth, and especially hates his front 2 teeth because over time they just kept getting shorter and shorter. So then that's our step 1. We move on to our step 2. Then you collect your data. Data collection is just like in dental school. You get your impressions, you get your study models. Here, this is a little bit different. So critical photographs. Photographs are key in this process. Number 1, you can use them to show your patient. Number 2, you can use it to show the lab. So it's very important. And the reason why too is because when I'm talking about the lab uses these photos to correlate and see basically how the teeth match up to the face. If you're just sending an impression, you don't have no reference point. But when you have those photos, the lab has at least something to go off of. So data collection, these are my photos. So we got our impression. We took a digital scan of him. These are his photos, occlusal shot, facial, and then side profile to a minimum. So then you can also utilize those photos on the side when you're looking at something. You want to change something, evaluate something, you use those photos. I do a lot. I pop all of them up in front of me. I look at the side profile. I see what's wrong, et cetera, et cetera. But these are going to be the main minimum 2 photos that you're going to need to send your lab. So 2 headshots. The first one on the left, it's basically going to give you information in terms of like the center of the nose, where his lips are, what type of smile he has, the vermilion borders, things like that. So actually, just to kind of note something on here, when I say take photos, trying to keep them very, very still and very head on. So the one on the left is actually, he's a little tilted, and typically people will tend to do that when they take photos, that either look away or they'll tilt their head a little bit, especially women. Usually they're kind of used to posing with their head slightly tilted a little bit. So really correct them as you need, okay? And then the second one on the right, retract it. So that will give you the frenum, where it is in relation to the teeth and whether or not he's centered, the midlines relationship from the upper to lower. So that will give you all of that with just these 2 photos. And again, to reinforce this, this is the minimum 2 photos that you have to give your lab in order to get a good result with wax ups. So once you get that, you move on to step 3. So step 3, exactly just like dental school. So you idealize the treatment plan. Emergency step 1 or phase 1, phase 2 hygiene, 3 active decay, get rid of that, make sure endo, all that stuff is done. Then step 4, you're going into ortho. And then after that, you're getting into the final restorations. So again, just like in dental school. So this is what he presented with. Again, so he had no emergencies, good oral hygiene, his gums are good, there's no perio or anything like that. No active decay as is. He just has those silver fillings in the back, but it never bothered him. There's no shadowing or anything like that underneath. But one thing that I'd like to point out is he has severe wear on 8 and 9. So I don't know if everybody could see it clearly there, but his incisal edge completely worn out, and then there's no more enamel at all on the lingual. So that's something to keep in mind when you're idealizing the treatment plan. Okay, so from there, we move on to step 4. Step 4 is basically what the patient wants to idealize his teeth. So if we look at Edgar here, so there's a lot of spacing on the bottom, there's some spacing on the top, but mainly we talked about the incisal edge wear there. So personally for me, I told him this is probably something that you're going to need, and to idealize his bite and things like that. And he actually agreed. So we basically proceeded with ortho. But if the patient says no, you skip the step and you go to the next one, which is step 5, which is the wax up. But basically for him, he did go forward with it. So this is his teeth as models when we decided to go for clear aligners. As you can see here, the incisal edges are worn because of his edge-to-edge bite. And he basically will not be able to correct that unless we do ortho. So you go through the explanations, and usually patients, if they understand the problem, they will usually accept. At the same time, we're correcting the spacing on the bottom, spacing on the top. Here's the best time to also align those midlines if they are off. So try your best, basically. But as you can see here, so we kept in mind also that that number 8 and number 9 were severely worn on the lingual. So what I planned out early on was to actually protrude number 8 and 9 a little bit more forward, so that instead later on, once we're prepping crowns for these 2 teeth, we're not over reducing on the lingual, because then you're even closer now to the nerve. So again, all these things you have to think about it during the treatment plan phase. Okay, so this is what he looked like after we were done with ortho. As you can see, at this point, we don't even have to do anything on the lower. The teeth closed out really well. So he still has a little bit of wear on his canine. He had some occlusal cratering on there, but fill him up with a couple of fillings, and he was good with that. And we basically told him, you really don't need to do anything else on the bottom, because otherwise he would have also had to do veneers or something like that. And I told him it was probably less invasive if we did it that way, and cheaper too for him at that point. So once we finished his ortho again, so this on these photos, I like to take a lot of pictures. You can see that number 8 and 9 protruded forward. There's some space there on the lingual. We prepared everything so that ideally we can do as much of minimum dentistry as possible. At this point now, you'll kind of go back, look at your initial treatment plan. We'll see whether or not if whatever you've had planned initially holds true. At this point, we're basically ready to move on to the next phase. So he wanted a nicer smile, everything to match up. So we basically moved forward. Treatment plan, basically 8 veneers and 2 crowns, and we basically got the wax up done. So this is the most critical step. In my experience, if you don't have something like this, you will not have a positive outcome, or it's really hard to get a positive outcome if you don't have this. The reason why is because here, this is where you get to be critical. You're looking at the anatomy, the contours, proportions, gingival outlines, how the teeth match together. And you can basically also start planning out for these, right? Where everything matches up, where his smile line is going to end up, the length of the teeth, work with the golden proportions, things like that. I usually use Glidewell because they send me this very, very nice wax up. So a lot of times what they do is they print the model and then they actually print the teeth separately and somehow matches them up together like this. So like the teeth are white, but the model is tan. So it's really nice when you get to look at that. It gives you a good differentiation of things. So I 3D print at my office. And a lot of times when a wax up gets sent back to me and I used to print that, the model basically would be tan completely and you could still see details, but it's actually much nicer looking like that. So I really like using Glidewell as a lab for my wax up. And this is also the last step also that allows you to plan out really what type of restorations you want. So looking at how the wax up matches to the patient's teeth, you can then decide, okay, can I use Emax? Can I use porcelain veneers? Can I use zirconia? What type of restorations you want? You can also kind of start adjusting the heights and contours, things like that, like I discussed about earlier. So again, this is kind of where you plan out. So getting my impressions sent to Glidewell, I get this back. So this is him right after ortho, and this is him with the wax up on. The most critical step here is how to achieve a wax up like this one. Very simple. You got to talk to your lab, you got to be descriptive, and you have to have your photos. Your photos are going to be the most critical step, like I said earlier, and this is why. Because then they'll be able to, like I said, match it up, match the teeth to the photos. And then like that, you'll be able to see if there's any cant, any discrepancies, things like that. Usually what I'll do is I'll tell them this. I want to recreate a harmonious smile. I want the midline to be as close to the tip of the nose and then the frenum as possible. At this point, I knew that for him, because his centrals were actually a little bit shorter, I wanted to lengthen them. So the gingival contour are okay. I asked the lab to bring up number 8 and 9 a little bit, so I'd have to do a little bit of gingivectomy there. But at about 10.5 millimeters of length on the central, thank you again to the photos, they were able to basically replicate what I needed for that. I told them, let's use the golden proportions. So centrals just a little bit, centrals and the canines should be about the same length, if not a little bit longer on the centrals, laterals shorter than the centrals, and they basically replicated that. They give you a very, very nice outline of everything. And then basically, how do I plan out the premolars? I tell them to follow the outline, so the incisal edge of how they place the centrals, laterals, and canine, and then basically extend it to the posterior. Looking at him, his buccal corridor was good, but again, just to kind of make everything line up, I told them to basically follow that. And so also to keep in mind, male or female, so patient was a male, so you ask for a little bit more, less refined, a little bit sharper edges. This is what the lab came up with, and I was very happy with it. It doesn't really necessarily show very well, but if you look at the reflection of the wax up, you can see on the facials, you can see the details. There is developmental grooves there. There is anatomy. There's details. So you have to pay attention to those things, because if you really want to truly recreate something anatomically correct and that also has all the proper features to it, so like the light bouncing off of it, things like that, you have to ask for those grooves, those developmental grooves. And these days, so personally for me, I think these days you really, really need to get a really good lab, a wax person, because basically if you have a good wax up, once you send that back with your prep, a lot of times what's going to happen is it's just basically kind of like a computer, you copy and paste it over. And so the person who's going to make or design the final restorations are going to kind of overlay things together and really just kind of copy it. So really the most critical person there is the person that does the wax up, at least for me. So once we're done with the wax up, you try it on. Okay, so this is another patient of mine. This is just to show you what it can look like You can see, depending on the patient, if the areas where the wax up has been done. A lot of times I do additive wax up. So because the teeth are already shorter for most patients who wants these type of work done, you just basically lengthen. And so like that, you have less to cut away later once you're doing your prep. From this step, you have two ways of actually adjusting it. Either you tell the lab to basically change the wax up at this point. So a lot of the times I'll go back and forth if they send me previews and things like that. Can you adjust this? Can you adjust that? Or you have another way of changing it is if you if you don't want to send it back and wait longer for the wax up to be recreated, you can basically go through your steps, finish the prep, put this on, and then at that point you make your adjustments how you want them, and then you take another impression of that new wax up or temporaries at that point, and then tell the lab to copy that one instead. So you have options, depending on how fast you want to move and patient's timeline and things like that. So what Glidewell will send you is this. So you'll have this putty matrix. A lot of times this putty matrix comes full. If you notice on there, there's these little V notch, and they basically go into the embrasures. And those notch are going to be basically an escape way for the material. So like the bisacryl that you're going to put in there to use as the wax up try-in. Usually I use Luxatemp as a material. A lot of times I use an A1 or a B1, depending on how white the patient wants to go. And we basically place it into the putty, and then you overlay it over the patient's teeth. So there, as you can kind of notice on the back of a teeth, you'll see a little bit of flash there. So that's the minimum that you can expect. A lot of times you'll have a little bit more, but if you didn't cut those little V's inside that putty, you'll get a lot more, and they'll basically just kind of sit there and pull over the gums. It's going to be a nightmare to take off. So that makes it a lot easier. So at this point here, I will just send the patient home. I will tell them, hey, go show it to your friends, family, go take some pictures, definitely prepare them. This is something that I typically don't bond on. I tell them it's probably going to wash out or crack open in about maybe like a day or so. And basically just if it happens, just peel it off. It's no big deal. You can, crack it open with just biting on it, although don't crack anything else because that'd be a bad thing. But yeah, so this is the last step before you cut into the teeth. Be happy with this because ultimately this is what you're going to cut off of. Measure multiple times and cut once. Okay. That would be my best advice at this point. So once you're done with that and patient's happy and they'll come back usually I'll have them come back for another appointment. We'll schedule the prep day. And we'll do exactly the same thing. We'll put it in the putty again. We'll keep the same one. Don't throw it away. We'll keep the same one. We'll overlay on the teeth. We'll get something like this again. And this is where I do my depth cuts and things like that. I will go off of this to ideally get the most minimal preparation possible. Number one, it maintains the tooth integrity. Number two, reduces the sensitivity to the patient. And that's a very, very big thing. So try to be as conservative as you can. This is also, a service you're doing to the patient because then less chances of root canals and things like that. So once you have your prep done, actually, before we get the prep done, Glidewell also sends you this to help you on the day of the preparation. So you'll have a prep guide, which is that model on top there. It'll kind of give you a reference point. So see kind of how the teeth should look like. A lot of times I start with looking at that, and that's kind of like a reference point. And then I'll actually use the stent though. After I'm done preparing my teeth, after my depth cut, after smoothing everything, I'll use the stent to then really, really pay attention to my reductions and to make sure that everything has been reduced adequately so that I have proper thickness of material everywhere on the teeth that we're working on. So these are my preps on the day of. We basically tried to stay as minimal as possible, especially for 8 and 9. We didn't want to over reduce on the lingual, so then we wouldn't run the chance of basically putting the patient through a couple root canals in that point. And again, I barely touched it. I just put a little margin on it. I know we're not seeing it on here, but that's basically what I've done. Everything else is a veneer going all the way back to the second bicuspids. So the last step, you temporize and finalize. So same as the try-on, you basically use the same putty matrix. I'll squirt the Luxotemp back into my putty matrix and then overlay it back onto the teeth. I like to do a technique called the sandwich technique. So at that point, because we need the temporaries to stay on, what I'll do is I'll actually spot etch on the facial of the teeth a little bit, just like maybe like a 2 mm circle, just right on the center of the tooth, and then I'll bond it, I'll cure it, and then I'll lay the temporaries over it. And then once they're on, once I take them off, I'll just like cure them just to kind of make sure everything sticks together. The reason why I like to do that is because number one, you're not attaching something permanent, number one, to the margins. We definitely do not want to damage our margin there. Say if later we needed to remove them, basically you'll just kind of either cut a little line right through the center. If they're margins, they're going to be really thin, so you'll just crack them off, kind of refine things a little bit. Again, don't touch your margin, just refine wherever there's a little bit of bond there. You'll smooth things out, trying to take it. If you take it a little bit over, it's fine. The veneer is going to give you a little bit of a thicker cement space, but it's going to be fine at that point. So this is what his temporaries look like. This is the point where you'll check the occlusion, you'll remove any kind of flashes or anything like that. Make sure all your interferences are proper and there's no hyperocclusion, because otherwise, wherever there's going to be hyperocclusion, the temps will break. So we want to minimize that. We want to have these temporaries look and feel as close to the final as possible. All of these are linked together. You don't want to sit there and basically cut them on one by one to have the patient floss. Just tell them for the next 2 weeks, really keep the area clean, brush your teeth. If you can, try to floss around or like use picks if food gets stuck in there. But usually if you create a nice smooth finish around the margins, basically everything will be fine. I'm looking at my next slide here. I had a photo of a burr. It's a very long and skinny red diamond burr. Not sure, it didn't translate on this one here, but it's the HSI 16610F. Skinny, super skinny. It has a very fine little tip at the end. And it's a red diamond. So that's the burr basically I'll be using around the margins to clean up the excess flash, and again, clean up the excess flash makes the gums much more happier by the time you take off the temps. And so once I get all that cleaned out, I basically will then send everything over to send my final impressions over to Glidewell. I had them basically make these final restorations for me. Same thing, they've copied the wax up that we initially gave them, reproduced the proper contour that I wanted, the facial anatomies. This is the length that we wanted. Everything worked out really well. So the reason why this model is gray is actually right at the time I had just bought my 3D printer and I just wanted to test the accuracy of it. So we printed actually his preps, and I just took all the final restorations and just literally laid him on the printer. And this is basically what I got. 3D printing now, I could tell you safely that the accuracy is really good. So that's kind of how I've tested that. Now we're going to move on to the cementation part. So as you can see, there's 2 crowns and 4 veneers. I just wanted to keep things simple. So because of the crowns, a lot of times, most of my crowns are cemented with glass ionomer. So this is my cement that I use. So this is the new GC Fujisami Evolve. I got to say, this is probably one of the easiest cement, the GI cement I've worked with. It basically tack cures super easily. Whether or not your assistant sits there and tack cure too much, doesn't even matter. It literally just peels right off the margin, leaves everything nice and clean. It's fluoride releasing, and it's it's very moisture tolerant. So they even say on their instructions, do not over dry the teeth before cementing. So this is the easy part, there's crowns. The harder part is now when it comes to bonding to zirconia veneer. So the protocol is a little bit different here compared to bonding porcelain or bonding Emax, because normally you'd use hydrofluoric acid, and for zirconia it's a little bit different. So this is the cement that I use. I like Panavia Veneer LC. They just came up with it about a year or two ago. I like the consistency of it. It's really easy to manipulate. It's not super runny, so that's good. But let's go over the protocol. So there's 3 steps that are a little bit different, and they're actually at the beginning. So instead of hydrofluoric etching the veneers, you'd actually sand, like after you try them on, you take them out, and then you'll actually sandblast those veneer, because then at that point you'll be creating little pores on the veneers for the mechanical retention. So aluminum oxide at 50 micron at 40 psi for 20 seconds after the try-in. Then you'll clean them with, I like to use the katana cleaner. Put it on the veneers, let them sit there for 10 seconds or more. Manufacturers recommend 10 seconds, and they said you're going to get basically about 97% of all the things cleaned out of there. So once you're done cleaning it, you can rinse off with water and then dry them. Some people like to put hydrofluoric acid here. You can, it's an option. You'll just basically clean it out again one more time. I typically don't, because it's already clean enough for me. So what I'll do is then I'll start applying my ceramic primer. I like to go basically 3 coats. I've trained my assistant to do it. So basically all of these are done by my assistant. They know the steps, and they pretty much just kind of follow that to a T. Once the primer is applied, I usually tell them 3 coats, just to make sure that you're coating the whole thing, in case one's not enough and you could have missed certain points. So once you do those main 3 steps here, everything else is about the same. So you'll etch your teeth, you'll apply your bond to the teeth, you'll air dry everything, then you'll put your cement into the veneers. This is where cementing veneers is a little bit different. So here I will use a tacky veneer light with a skinny tip. Skinny tip because I want to actually tack the veneer on, but I don't want to cure the margins yet, and I don't want the extra cement in the interproximal to basically harden and become very, very hard to remove later. So I'll use a very skinny tip there. And basically, then after that, you clean up the cement, you floss interproximally, and then you do your final cure. So that skinny light tip looks like this. So I believe it's from Ivoclar. I've used it a few times in the past, but then now what we use is actually that light right there in the middle. So this is actually the AMD Monet laser. This is actually a laser, not a halogen light. And basically what it'll come with is these little skinny tips. So little diameter orange tip that clips onto where the light is, and then it'll just basically reduce or improve the diameter of the beam that comes out of it. And the cool thing about that light is it's actually a 1-second curing light. And so when you're curing veneers, everything is thin enough that the light should penetrate, although lasers have a much, much, much deeper penetration, and the beam is a lot stronger too. So therefore they recommend just do a second, do all of the teeth at 1 second. And if you feel like you want to maybe cure it a little bit more, go back and then do it 1 second at a time all the way across one more time. I usually do that about 2 to 3 times. It's only a second, so it's not like it's going to take forever. It's usually when it's 10 seconds per tooth, 10 second, 10 second, that it takes a little bit longer. But that's basically it. Once the veneers are on, this is what it looks like. The gums are, they didn't like the temporaries so much, but if that happens before you actually cement them, just kind of clean the gums a little bit with glutaraldehyde or some kind of disinfectant. Here you have the option of, before cementing them on, to use try and paste. Usually I just put them on, I have the patient lay back, and then he can look at it. And so this is what Edgar looks like before and after. Much bigger smile. His smile looks much more of a normal smile as opposed to a reverse smile. Not sure why he's sweating so much on the final picture. He probably should have looked more happier on that one. I think it could have been probably very hot that day. But anyway, so my steps basically, just like we talked about at the beginning, visualize the end result, get your data, create your ideal treatment plan. 4 and 5, if you can do ortho, do them. If not, and the patient basically says no, move on. Then you get your wax up, prepare, try it on, prepare your teeth, and then finalize. I kind of look at these steps as basically a sequence of things, just like kind of like how I do everything in life, really. I like to plan things. So just couple years ago, 2, 3 years ago, my family and I went on to this trip to Japan, and I just wanted to be amazing. And so I really wanted to see all of these things. You know, you go online on YouTube, things like that, you look things up, people tell you, you got to do this, you got to do that. So that was so much information. So the only way really to make it a good trip is to plan everything up front and then just enjoy your trip as you're doing it. So same thing. I have the same 8 steps. You visualize the end in mind. You pick, you get your map. You pick the main areas you want to visit. Then you map them out. And then from there, you create the plan that you're going to follow. Then from there, you start to lay out the places you're going to stay, how you're going to travel, and things like that. And then you put the smaller things in, which are restaurants, low activities, things like that. And then you finalize. Best trip I've ever been on. That's basically because it was planned out. We basically printed the whole plan and then just followed it to a T. I actually was surprised that it worked out so well, but that's basically that. Another thing that I like to kind of use planning for is actually a trip to the groceries. A lot of time, I really want to maximize my time and not spend that much time at the grocery store. So I do the same thing. I kind of basically look at the main outcome, all the things that I need, where they are, I'll map it out, best route to take, or I try to remember it because we basically hit the same store every time. I get my items, usually the additional things that I didn't plan for that I call new items to try, and then basically check out. So again, if you plan things out, it should be very, very systematic and very, very easy to follow and very time efficient. This is a funny thing I found online. And the reason why I put it on there is basically because this is how I shop and this is how my wife shop. I like to be very straight to the point, get in and out. She likes to kind of hit everything in case she forgot something, and then likes to go all the way back, et cetera, et cetera. Not saying that's how. I'm not really gonna say that's how men and women really fully shop, but that's how we shop. So that's what it is. But what it is also how to plan for things. So this case is one of my early cases in residency. The patient basically just kind of came in and said, "Hey, I want to get all my teeth done." And basically, the clinical director told me, just if it's a great learning case, see how you would do it, and kind of unfortunately just gave me free reign. And so I didn't know my lab. I wasn't prepared. I, again, just kind of no preparation, no pre-design, no wax up, uh, just kind of winged it basically. And so, unfortunately, for these cases, you'll just kind of go in and then just prep the teeth and then just hope for the best. And unfortunately, the lab that they were using at the time wasn't the greatest. So that was kind of like the final outcome. This is one of my cases that marks me. And so I just wish I could go back and basically do it again for him. But at this point, yes, always be prepared. That's the only way you'll get something nice. And so you're, you're the clinician, you're the person who has the knowledge. So, give the best to your patients to give them a good outcome. A couple of quotes here to kind of finish up here, but when opportunity knocks, it's too late to prepare. You have to be prepared already. You have to know the steps. You have to kind of learn all this stuff before the opportunity comes and your patient presents to your door. Preparation is key to success. It's a lifelong process, and it's a lifelong process for us as dentists, because since the day we signed on to become dentists, we said that we're gonna, there's a very famous thing that they do at USC, and they're always, you're going to be a lifelong learner, and I'm sure it's at other places too, but you have to work diligently and continue to get better and better. So remember, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. These are basically quotes from Coach John Wooden, UCLA basketball coach, won tons and tons of championships. So if he's making it happen and he's winning, he knows what he's talking about. So in closing, going back to the beginning, always start with the end goal in mind. That's the most important thing. don't rush the process. So take your time, right? If there's things that you want to change, things like that, change them. Measure multiple times, cut once. So plot before you dot. Always also document. Takes lots of photos. That helps the lab tremendously. Quality over quantity. So less photos, but if they're good photos, that works too. Be as descriptive as you can with your lab prescription. That's the only way you'll get what you want. Don't just say, hey, we want 8 veneers, 2 crowns, and call it a day. No, you have to be descriptive. And then keep things simple otherwise. The lab will thank you for that. Your patient will thank you for that. Don't overcomplicate things. It'll make your life a living hell otherwise. Okay. And then just keep pushing for perfection. That's the only way you're going to get better and better. That's the only way your outcomes are going to get better and better. So, yeah, that's that. So thank you very much. That's my presentation. I hope that I didn't bore anybody to death. And
Thanks, Roger. That was a beautiful case, and I love the way you took us through it.
Thank you.
Yeah, really well done. We've got a lot of interesting questions from our viewers, so let's get started on our discussion. Okay, so there's some treatment planning questions right from the get-go. Several
Yes.
of our attendees noticed that this patient, he sort of looks like a guy that might have OSA, right? He's got a big neck. He's a little bit heavy set. So and of course that can affect some of the things you noted in his dental condition, and in fact
Yes.
it can even affect acid reflux, because you saw that there was no lingual anatomy on some of those anterior teeth. So what were your thoughts when you looked at him? Did you screen him for OSA?
So yes, lingual reflex, I've kind of ruled it out because it only happened on 8 and 9, not necessarily on all of the teeth. So that was kind of like one of the clues that told me it's probably more so a little bit more grinding that created that. Although it could be, no, his wife didn't really mention anything in terms of her being bothered too much by his sleeping. Although yes, the tongue is a little bit on the bigger side. However, when we prepped him, there was not that many issues with him kind of keeping the tongue away. It didn't feel like that overbearing tongue that just basically splat over all of the teeth when you're prepping, things like that. So minimal screening though. It's not like I delved into details, but once we finished the case, we basically made him also retainers as well, since he did go through ortho. But yeah, so that's kind of how I've
and I was going to ask you about the retainer. Several people did comment on that, and in my discussion with orthodontists, they always remind me that malocclusions are extremely stable.
Yeah.
and then once you fix them, they're not all that stable. Whatever forces,
Yes.
whatever musculature and habits cause that malocclusion, they're still there. So
Yes, so that is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so actually right after he was done with ortho, there is a step that I take also to try to do an occlusal equilibration with him, and I usually use a leaf gauge for that. And once he's equilibrated, and I basically trying to place him in a more of a CR position than CO, that should also help a little bit with the final outcome and some of those malocclusion forces that he potentially had from the beginning. Yes.
Okay, we're probably not going to get into a whole CR versus CO thing here.
No.
That's for another time. Okay.
Yeah.
So and as far as the aligner therapy, did you do that yourself or did you refer to an orthodontist?
No, I did it myself. He
Okay.
was easy enough that when looking at his arches, you can see that the edge to edge and the anterior was created by the protrusion of his lower teeth. That's why he had so many spaces there. So I felt like basically by pulling some of those back and pretty much reducing the occlusal and removing all the spaces, it'll line up a lot better to the upper. Then once we kind of tailor the upper to the lowers, and then also that 8 and 9 by protruding that forward to minimize the prep on number 8 and 9, I was going to be able to basically deliver everything. Because then after that, we're only doing veneers on the other teeth, and only 8 and 9 we're going to require crowns.
Got it. Got it. Do you find that a lot of adult reject the ortho? You know, you say, hey, the first step is to get these things lined up. About what percentage of your patients will accept the aligner therapy versus asking you to do the best you can the way they are?
I want to say it's probably going to be more at this point. I do push the orthotherapy a little bit more because I always tell them, it's all about patient understanding what you're trying to accomplish. And if you tell them, hey, I'm going to have to shave so much of your tooth because this one tooth is so forward and it could end up in a root canal, a lot of them do understand that. And so, you know, that's why I'm kind of like in between. I want to say probably 50-50 for me. Out there, they'll probably reject ortho a little bit more, I want to say. So maybe 60-40, but usually if you're really, explaining to the patient with obviously their well-being in mind at the end of the day, it shouldn't deter them from actually following your treatment plan.
Do you, this is interesting, Roger. So do you give them like a separate fee for the aligner therapy and then for the restorative, or do you wrap it up into one case fee because it's all,
Because
one treatment?
right, because I've done it myself. I usually wrap everything up into a whole treatment plan. Everything is still, by per tooth, and the ortho treatment is quoted as a one fee for the whole thing. But that's basically how my office manager did it for that, or my treatment coordinator did it for this patient.
Okay, good, great. All right, so let's get into the planning of the case. We've got to find a new word for wax up, right? Because in your wax up, there was no wax involved, right? It was all
Yeah,
digital. Is that right?
D-wax, I guess you could call it digital
Yeah,
wax up, maybe.
I don't know. I'm going to work on a new terminology for that. But that's pretty much where you go right now. They're designing this thing. The lab is doing the design digitally, and then
Yeah,
they're printing the wax up, or let's call it the diagnostic planning
D-wax.
model or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And do you ask to see the images of the design before they print the wax up, or do you just let them go ahead and shoot it at you?
I usually like to see it because then, sometimes I might have written something on the prescription that they've taken completely off of what I've initially planned. So I always tell them, hey, as soon as you're done with the D-wax,
Right.
digital wax up, send me a couple photos, just send me an occlusal shot, send me a couple angles so I can kind of see what that looks like. And then a lot of times I'll just tell them to revise it on the spot. But then a lot of times if it usually looks, I mean, that case probably took me one or two revisions. Then once they sent it to me and I tried it on, the patient was so excited. He was like, okay, take my money. Here, let's go. Let's do it.
Now, if you make changes, like either changes in the wax up or changes in the
Yes.
patient's mouth with the provisionals on, how do you capture those changes so the lab knows exactly how you've modified that original design?
Um, so what I usually do is as soon as we have him on and I've done all of my modifications, I will then take a new impression of the temporaries on. That's why you have to be critical with the occlusion. You have to be critical with the way the patient's biting on those temporaries because that will replicate exactly what's going to be at the end. So I just take an impression of that.
That
So
digital
what
impression, right?
digital impression? Yes,
Right.
I'll take a scan of it. I'll send it in with the prep impression, and I'll try to also, on a side note, when you're doing digital impression, it's easier to relate things that are similar. So since they're veneers, the lingual cusp of the teeth are going to be pretty good. That's going to be easy for the lab to match up. But if you're, say, doing crowns or things like that, what you can do is capture some of the palate gaze too, and that will actually help the lab match those a lot better than if you just kind of sent just the teeth and captured maybe like a millimeter or two of the papilla in the gums.
That's a
So
that's a
something to
great
keep in mind.
that's a great hint. That's a great hint. And then do you use any software as far as the planning, or is it simply the lab's design software that's being used here?
Here, the lab did most of the designing.
Okay.
and the planning and all that stuff.
Okay. How involved are the patients as far as in selecting the smile? Like, do you show them smiles with different kinds of anatomy? Gee, I really like that boxy look, or I want those tapered teeth. You know how we sometimes do with our denture patients.
Yeah, so you can tell them, hey, bring me a picture of your favorite actor or whatever, or tell them to bring whatever photos they've had. So a lot of people are gonna be like, oh yeah, when I was, for older patients, when I was like 20, I used to look beautiful. My teeth are straight. So I'll tell them, bring me a photo, get them involved in the process, even though you're gonna send it to the lab. You can send the photos to the lab too of what the patient wants to look like. They'll obviously kind of go off of that a little bit, but obviously if you're coming in looking like him, who's a little bit more on the bulkier side, and you're telling me, hey, I want to kind of look like, I don't know, Tom Cruise or something like that with his skinny face. I mean, you'll take it. Just get the patient involved in it. But at the very end of the day, like, you're also the one telling the lab how you want them to, because patient at the end of the day, as long as it looks good on him, he's not going to be picky. You the digital the try-in, the test drive, as I called it, the patient is going to basically tell you what he likes or doesn't like, because after that day where he goes home, takes all his photos and stuff, he's going to come back and he's going to tell you whether or not he likes it. And up till now, I've never really had anybody said they didn't like it.
That's great. And of course, you're communicating with them the whole time. You're getting their feedback, and they're wearing this. So if they've got comments, they've got plenty of opportunity to provide that feedback.
And you do that always before you touch the teeth. I know that out there sometimes, it can happen where you just, patient wants them then and there, you just get to it and you prep. You don't know what it's going to look like. I like to always have the patient know what the end result is going to be, because then like that, you'll have less headaches, a lot less headaches down the road.
Okay. We've got several requests here for you to share your protocol for the veneer bonding and your protocol for the provisional bonding. Is that something you can share with us, and Nicole can get it out to all the people that attended?
Sure,
That okay?
absolutely.
Sure thing. Okay. Let's see. I've got additional questions that just came in. Let's see. Oh, there's a shade difference, obviously, between the upper where you did all these beautiful restorations and the lower where you left the teeth natural. Is that a
Mhm.
consideration?
So it is. Initially, after we delivered the final restorations, the patient this whole time, basically, when we've tried things on, we've tried it with a bisacryl material. So it's going to look a little bit more like composite, which kind of blends in a little bit better. At this point, since we went with zirconia, and the reason why we went with everything zirconia is because in the event that he was a grinder, we'd minimize the risk of things breaking, things like that. I told him, you have to explain that zirconia is a little bit more opaque for what it is. And the patient was, that's fine, as long as it stays on, I'm okay with it. So he actually, as soon as we delivered them, he loved the white that they were. And so actually his color is not really that bright. We actually ended up going with an A1.
Oh,
And
really?
so
By today's standards, that's a dark shade.
yeah, definitely. But in Bakersfield where I'm at, they actually like natural. So to him it was okay. But for the bottom, so I told him, you have the choice. You can leave them yellow like that, or you can get some bleaching trays and basically start bleaching. And that's kind of what he wanted to do. So he's going to also go for bleaching after that. Since he have retainers, I told him, you can put your gel in the retainers and then just kind of sit with that daily, and then you'll basically see the progression in terms of
Very
the
good.
bleaching at the end of it.
Okay, got a question about how long the aligner therapy took.
I believe his took about 10 months.
Okay.
10 months.
And you mentioned how much tooth structure was missing from the lingual of those central incisors. Did you consider doing root canal therapy prophylactically?
I typically tend to stay more on the less treatment the better. So I told him that there is a chance that after we prep the teeth, you may experience some sensitivity if it continues. Be expecting a root canal. He says, you know what, let's try it. I mean, I felt like we've provided enough space there. Again, I did not really touch the lingual at all. The only thing I've touched is the interproximal, and I put a feather margin on the lingual, and that's basically what the crown is sitting on. So I did not touch 8 and 9 on the lingual at all.
Okay. Question here about how you determined the anterior end position of the anterior teeth. You didn't open the bite here, did you?
No, I didn't.
Okay, right. So basically, the jaw position stayed the same. You just moved the anterior teeth, and you drew in the lower anterior.
I drew in the lower anterior, but right after we're done with ortho, I did the occlusal equilibration.
Got it. Got
So
it.
he is technically a little bit closer to CR compared to where he was in CO.
Okay. Well, that was a great case. I love the way you explained it step by step. It's a methodology that anybody can, that's watching can use, and it turned out great. So thank you so much. I
Thank
really
you very
enjoyed
much.
having you here. And I'm just looking, there's still more questions coming. Yeah. There's question, bonding zirconia veneers. Yeah, that's a really well validated procedure, and the
It
technique
works.
that
It
Roger
works.
showed works really well. Um, there was another comment here. Well, with all this planning, was zirconia really necessary? Zirconia do not bond as well as Emax. I don't think that's a proven true statement. I think that using the bonding protocols as described, it's a very, very reliable bond. I can tell you here in our clinic, Dr. Chi, Dr. Manoli have done many, many zirconia veneers, and the debonding rate is almost zero. So
Yeah.
it's a highly reliable procedure. I did
As
get a
long
question.
as, yeah. Oh,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I was just gonna say, as long as you follow the protocol, as long as you keep the teeth somewhat dry, it'll work. It'll work.
There you go. Okay. And there's always questions like, you mentioned using the Katana cleaner. People use Ivoclar cleaners. Here's
Mhm.
a question: can I just use bleach?
You can. However, there's other properties inside those cleaners that actually helps remove all the phosphates and things like that that bleach may not miss. I believe I've seen a study from the Katana cleaner saying that bleach will still leave about 20% residues behind, whereas the Katana cleaner that I use basically very close to zero.
Right, right, and they're specifically designed to remove those phospholipids
Yeah.
that adhere
Yep.
to the tooth and prevent bonding. So you can. I
Exactly.
saw a recent study. They used to say use 5% sodium hypochlorite. Now they're talking about 1%. So it's still possible, but I definitely agree with your advice to do what the manufacturer says. These.
Exactly. It's available to you. It doesn't really cost that much. I mean, if you're gonna do a case like this, it's gonna well pay over for that tiny little bottle there. So I just said, you know what? Don't take any chances.
Well, very good. Well, Dr. Roger Pham, thank you so much for a great lecture, great presentation, great case. And thanks to our panel for all their wonderful advice. And thanks all of you for joining us today. And we appreciate your attendance. We're going to be off next week for our Implant Restorative Symposium, but join us on October 20th when Dr. Robert Colts will be returning to talk about enhancing patient care using AI. So have a good couple of weeks, and we'll see you 2 weeks from today. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.